It has become more and more evident as training camp has gone on that the Eagles have a big hole on their roster at wide receiver 3. So Howie Roseman went out and made a trade for Jahan Dotson. So naturally today, we're going to be talking about Jahan Dotson's play, how he'll be used in the Eagles offense, any red flags we should pay attention to, and how it affects the upcoming roster cuts. So having said that, let's jump into Jahan Dotson's play. His overall athleticism is solid, though I wouldn't classify it as anything special. But really, the best part of his game is his route running, and in particular on intermediate routes. He does a good job with his stems to gain leverage and set up moves. He sells vertical routes well before quickly snapping off the route, and he has good recognition of when to use head fakes and rocker steps at the top of the route. He preemptively hand fights to prevent DBs from latching on, does a good job making himself quarterback friendly on routes, and he shows good awareness of where the sideline is to make sure to get his feet in bounds. He's versatile enough to play inside or outside, and he really had a better year in 2022 when he played much more on the outside. I do think he's best on intermediate routes, though I do think he can be used on deep routes, particularly on routes like skinny post or deep post where the quarterback can throw it to his leverage. If you're trying to throw jump balls to him down the sideline, that's not really his game. So he's a guy that's probably going to get used more on routes over the middle or intermediate routes where he can attack spots and zone. Now, jumping into the downsides to his game, he is undersized at about 5'10 and somewhere around 180 pounds. He also has very short arms, and his hands are just okay. He's never really had a high drop rate, but he does have a bad habit of body catching or letting the ball come into his body, even if he's not particularly catching with his chest or with his stomach. A lot of times he's letting that ball get very close to him with his hands. He has a limited catch radius, and he's not a great jump ball receiver. In addition to that, physical play can get the best of him at times, and that could be in pressed or at the top of the route. And if he allows hands to get on him, he doesn't do a great job of getting them off. Like I said, he's not a jump ball receiver, and he's not overly physical or crafty with the ball in his hands. His yak and his missed tackles forced are limited throughout his career. And while he does have enough burst to beat angles from second level defenders, he doesn't really have enough burst to consistently beat the angles of third level defenders. So if he does something like catch a slant with room to beat the angles from the linebackers running across the middle, he'll do that. But once he gets to the third level, he's not really running past those guys. And because he's not a physical player, he's not running through tackles. He's not super elusive and agile with the ball in his hands. He doesn't force a lot of missed tackles. And in fact, he has 3 career missed tackles forced in the 2 years that he's been playing. In addition to that, I will say that that blocking is not his forte. I would just be prepared that there are going to be plays that are just ruined because of his blocking, whether that's on bubble screens or if he's having to crack a safety that's rotating into the box. So that's something to pay attention to as well. Does he potentially get rotated in and out during the game based on certain situations and plays that the Eagles like to run? Now, moving on to how he'll be used in this Eagles offense, I think he's going to be used. Listen, Kellen Moore's scheme is going to involve around a lot of quick games. So I'd expect to see a lot of slants, hitches, speed outs. You're going to see him run some bubble routes as well. I mentioned in the preseason review of the game against the Ravens how, I question a little bit if Britton Covey, there was a play where Britton Covey caught a bubble route. He ends up having to cut back into the defense. I wonder if a guy that's a little bit faster takes that play and gets another 10, 15 yards by being able to run down the sidelines. I think that's a play Jahan Dotson can probably eke out a few extra yards instead of having to cut back. So I think he's an upgrade there. Again, I think he's best as an intermediate receiver. I think he's used will be used on a lot of crossing routes, a lot of deep outs, a lot of curl routes, things where he can really show off his route running. Because as a receiver in the underneath area and the quick game, he's going to catch the ball, but he doesn't create a lot after the catch. So short catches are going to stay short catches. I'd rather target him in other areas to help move the sticks. But really, when you look at his game, he's not built to be a guy that's winning off of quick game and creating a lot of yards after the catch. Now, I do think one of the best parts about this trade is that he is a much better option for what the Eagles had in case AJ or Devontae were to go down for a significant amount of time due to injury. I don't expect him to just come in and fill the void that one of those players would leave. I think that's a little crazy to think that. I think some of that void will be taken up by Goddard and by Saquon, and just probably running the ball a little bit more to some degree. But I do think he's reliable enough to help keep drives going throughout the game, keep the chains moving. And the move mitigated some risks and really shored up a weak spot in the roster. Now, when you look at some potential red flags, the Commanders are trading away a cost controlled first round pick that's going into his third season to a division rival. Why would they do this? It's not like Jahan Dotson's going to be on the Eagles next year as well. So even if the Commanders are saying, we're going to load to build up for next year, since we have a rookie quarterback this year, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, considering that Jahan Dotson is still going to be competing for a division rival. So do they know something that we don't? Is there a red flag somewhere? Is he just not getting a hang of of the new scheme for the new coaching staff that's come in? Is there something else that we just don't know behind the scenes? I don't know the answer to that. I thought his tape was good enough to not just trade away at this point in time in his career. He's going into his third year of his career. There's still plenty of development that can take place at that point in time. So I'm a little curious. Is it a move to load up for Brandon Ayuk? If that is the case, why wouldn't the 49ers want to get Dotson in return plus some other assets? Do the 49ers, did they not like him for some reason? I don't know the answer to that. So there is a little bit of red flags. It makes you wonder a little bit, why is a division rival trading away a first round player on a cost controlled contract? I didn't. It's something to keep in mind. Now, as we move on to how this affects the roster and really the upcoming roster cuts, when you start to think about the roster long term, I really think the vets, so Paris Campbell and John Ross, are guys that are probably in danger the most. When you start to think of, Jahan Dotson is going to come in and fill that void that they wanted to fill with Paris Campbell or John Ross. Obviously, the Eagles haven't seen enough this offseason to not go out and make a move for Jahan Dotson. So, in my mind, considering they're vets, they are only here for 1 year, they're probably not going to be brought back on the team. I think Johnny Wilson and Anais Smith are probably safe to make the team, especially considering they're rookies, cost-controlled contracts for 4 years. I know Anais Smith earlier in the camp was struggling, but it seems that he's really turned it around, and it's probably made it close enough that the Eagles are going to have to factor in that he is a rookie that is acclimating to the game, that he is going to be cost controlled. So I ultimately, even though Anais Smith struggled early in camp, I think he ends up making the roster. And then I think Britton Covey will end up making the roster. I think mainly because of his punt return ability. Now, that would leave the Eagles with 6 wide receivers to make the initial 53-man roster, but that's something that we're going to discuss following the final preseason game when we talk about the initial 53-man roster projections. So stay tuned for that. And for the people that have been following along regularly, I have been delayed in putting out the review of the second preseason game as I had family in town this past week. This is pretty much the last family and friend time I get until the Eagles win the Super Bowl. So, having said that, I do want to put out a video before the next preseason game, kind of discussing all of the linebackers and who has really been the best in the first 2 preseason games. So, stay tuned to that. And until next time, go Birds.